Hey readers, Nikki here. If you're Kushiels curious or you need a refresher on some of the basic aspects of the elaborate world that Jacqueline Carey created, this video is for you. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Note that I'm only going to be focusing on KUSHIEL'S DART here, which is book 1 of KUSHIEL'S Legacy, the PHÉDRE'S Trilogy, and that's because it's the only one I've read so far. And this is deceptively long. It's like the length of Game of Thrones. And reflecting on it, I'm now realizing how much I've been through with PHÉDRE. It's like 3 books in one. And here are 9 of its more spectacular aspects and some caveats as to why you might want to read KUSHIEL'S DART. So, reason number 9. It's similar in some ways to a Game of Thrones. Not only is it the length of Game of Thrones, but it's similar in that it's loaded with court politics and deception. And Jacqueline Carey literally references the Game of Thrones multiple times in here. I will warn that this is not a beginner fantasy book for that very reason. The steep curve to become familiar with this world. And it can be pretty intimidating to just crack open this book and flip through all the names to get to chapter 1. So when you crack this baby open, right, you have the map, right? And yes, there's a map. And then after that, you have pages of names. And as my good friend Brittany said, put that shit in the back of the book. It's a little overwhelming for that reason. It's a lot of French names. This book would be an ideal read for you if you enjoy plot puzzles, which I do. I induce plot like crazy. And if you have an ear for and recall of French names, which I don't, it would be good for you. I took Spanish in high school and I tried Rosetta Stone French a few years ago, but gave up out of frustration because the program was not accepting my pronunciations. I swear, they sounded correct in my head. I'd start yelling the words louder and louder and louder, and that did not help. And yeah, I definitely can't carry a tune either, so maybe I'm a little tone deaf. I don't know how that works. There's a barbaric Northman in this book who mispronounces PHÉDRE'S name as Phaedra, spelled phonetically as Faydra in the text. It took me a bit. I was like, he's saying her name right. Why is it spelled out like that? So I guess I'm a barbarian then. So I apologize if I mispronounce any names or words in this video. French is hard. Unlike me, PHÉDRE does have an ear for languages and can sing. Those are 2 of her superpowers. And it comes up that perhaps PHÉDRE is a bit of a Mary Sue. I'd argue that she approaches Mary Sue, but is flawed enough to not quite be there. Also, what's the fun of going on an adventure with a fantasy protagonist if they're not exceptional in some way? That brings me to reason number 8. Something else that makes PHÉDRE interesting is that she is a cursed protagonist. The story is told by some future PHÉDRE in first-person narration, and I suspect it must be told quite far in the future because the narration often feels far away for being first person. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It gives the story some heft, makes it seem historical, like we are witnessing the retelling of important events. But keep that in mind. If that kind of narration is not your cup of tea, I'm going to give you a bit of PHÉDRE'S background, since the beginning of this book is dense. I read the first 100 pages or so twice, and the first chapter 3 times, mostly to find my bearing in Carey's intricate world so I could maximally appreciate the subtleties. And there are so many little gems in here. So Phédre's d'Angeline, a descendant of people with angelic bloodlines. So that in itself, super cool. The d'Angelines have unearthly beauty and a deep appreciation for art and culture, aesthetics in general. Phèdre often refers to herself as a whore's unwanted get. Her mother was an adept of Jasmine House, a courtesan of the night court, who defied all warnings and advice and married Phèdre's father, the third son of a merchant prince. Apparently, a poor match. Acolytes of the night court are sorted into houses based upon their propensities and physical traits. More on that later. Phèdre inherited her father's ivory skin and her mother's curly sable hair, a combination that didn't quite suit any of the 13 houses of the night court. To top it off, Phèdre was flawed, born with a scarlet mote in the iris of her left eye. For this, she was rejected by her mother's house, Jasmine House. This meant that Phèdre's parents would have to raise her within their own means, which was uncommon for those of their ranks. They tried to work as merchants, but failed, and ultimately struck a deal with the Dowain of Sirius House, giving up their rights as parents and selling Phèdre to Sirius House, essentially as an indentured servant, where she would be raised as an acolyte therein until the age of 10. Phèdre's scarlet mote was seen as a flaw. It had been some generations since a d'Angeline had been pricked by KUSHIEL'S dart. The mote in her eye was his mark. And so she was not recognized at that young age as what she truly was, either cursed or blessed by the angel Kushiel to experience pain and pleasure as one and bring balance to the world. So Phèdre was one in generations. That's pretty special. Reason number 7, Jesus Dionysus and his 8 scions. Jacqueline Carey won the Locus Award for Best First Novel for KUSHIEL'S DART. In a 2002 Locus interview, she said that the Genesis came to her in a vividly lucid dream around 1993, and she doesn't usually have that sort of dream. She describes having dreamt of this young man, shirtless and just wearing tattered pants of some sort on the rocky, barren shore of an inland lake. He was hit by musket fire, 3 or 4 balls, spinning and turning and falling. And then roses were blooming in profusion on the barren stone. The dream, she said, stuck with me so much that I wrote a short story, The Martyr of the Roses. It was set in a sort of alternate Russia, but there was also a character from Terra d'Ange that stayed with me. The idea of a highly sophisticated, decadent civilization contrasted with others that had been held back to a more barbaric phase. I think I was building that world in my subconscious for a long time. And Carey's world is vividly and gorgeously brought to life on the page. If you like decadent prose and a glittering tapestry of ambiance woven before you, then this book might be for you. And beauty is foundational to the land of Terra d'Ange, so much so that it's part of their religion. There are 9 deities revered by the d'Angelines. The deities are Elua and his companions. Elua is a Jesus-like figure whose sin is loving earthly things too much. A review I read by author Andy Gavin, link below, described Elua as a cross between Jesus and Dionysus. So fitting in many ways. The d'Angelines' religion is a cross between Christianity and paganism, especially the temples and the festivities, and we get to luxuriate and accompany Phèdre to these on numerous occasions. So the lore goes like this. Centuries ago, Elua was arrested by the king of Perses, and 8 of the one god's angels, later to become Elua's companions, came to earth to free him. Of course, Elua's father is the one God. Nama, one of the angels, slept with the king of Perses and others along the way out of love for Elua and to protect and serve him. When the one God eventually invited Elua to heaven, he rejected the offer and instead formed another realm beyond Terra d'Ange, where the d'Angelines believe they go after death. Looking at the map, you can see Terra d'Ange, there's the city of Elua, and a region named for each of the 7 angels, save Cassiel. And Cassiel was known as the perfect companion to Elua. And besides Elua, the most important deities in this installment of Kushiel's Legacy are Nama, Cassiel, and of course, Kushiel, who's the punisher of God. If I had to try to place this world historically within our own, and keep in mind I'm a scientist, history is not one of my strengths, I'd place it around the time of the Sun King, maybe like 17th century France. Another creative aspect I love is number 6, the court of night blooming flowers. Jacqueline Carey was a researcher in art history, and it shows, especially with her conception of the court of night blooming flowers, also known as the night court. The adepts of the night court serve the deity Nama. It's made up of 13 houses. Each house has its own explanation for Nama's private motivation in having slept with the king of Perses to free Elua. So there's Sirius House. Sirius House is the oldest house in the night court. It was founded around 600 years ago. That is the house that Phèdre is raised in until age 10. Its canon is fragility. They revere the fair and frail. And so that's super fitting because Sirius blooms last only one night. And I love this quote from chapter 1. Beauty is at its most poignant when the cold hand of death holds poised to wither it imminently. The Sirius motto is all loveliness fades. And I'm going to just quickly run through the canon of each house and their motto because I do love the night court. So Jasmine House, that's the house that Phèdre's mother was an adept in. Their canon is sensuality and pleasure, and their motto is for pleasure's sake. Byrony House, their canon is wealth, and their motto is wealth seeks company. Dahlia House, their canon is dignity. They revere the reserved and the solemn. Their motto is upright and unbending. Gentian House, their canon is mysticism, and their motto is truth and vision. Then there's Elysium House. Their canon is modesty. Their motto is with eyes averted. Fitting. Then there's Balm House. Their canon is healing and they revere compassion, and their motto is rest and be soothed. Camellia House. Their canon is perfection and their motto is without fault or flaw. Heliotrope House. Their canon is devotion and they like to bask in the love. Their motto is thou and no other. Orcus House, their canon is humor and also luck, and their motto is joy and laughter. Eglantine House, their canon is creativity, and their motto is to create, is to live. And then there are 2 houses that cater to tastes with a sharper edge. So there's Valerian House, and their canon is submission, and their motto is I yield. And then there's Mandrake House, which is the opposite. Their canon is dominance, and their motto is yield all. So all 13 houses serve Nama, the Aphrodite-like deity, through sex, but in a style that is their own. And what's always fun having houses like this is you get to think about and pretend like, which house would I be sorted into? And so for me, I think I'd probably end up either in Eglantine, which is to create is to live, or maybe Camellia, because I'm kind of a perfectionist. But I hope it would be Eglantine, I think. And returning to the last 2 houses for a minute, notice that the canons of Valerian and Mandrake houses are submission and dominance, respectively. So their adepts partake in BDSM in service to both Nama and Kushiel. So yes, I'm sure you've heard this about the series in general. There is lots of sex and some BDSM. It is concentrated in the first third or so of the book, and I didn't think it was overly graphic or explicit, but that depends on your threshold and imagination because a good amount is left unsaid. For comparisons, I'll use Outlander and Song of Ice and Fire. I'd say the scenes are probably less explicit than Diana Gabaldon's and more tastefully described than those by George R.R. Martin. So back to the significance of the houses. The bond price of each servant is paid by one of the 13 houses. By the time an acolyte turns 10, they relocate to the house that purchased their bond and learn beneath their adepts. Then, when the acolyte comes of age, they work as courtesans, and the house establishes contracts with patrons. Patrons tip the courtesans for their services, and they can put that money towards earning their mark, which is an elaborate tattoo of the house sigil inked upon their backs. It's inked bit by bit and takes a while to earn or complete. So once completed, they're elevated to house adepts, free to decide upon their own patrons. I will give minor spoiler here. It's not really a spoiler because we know this by the end of chapter 2. But PHÉDRE'S mark is not purchased by one of the 13 houses. It's purchased by the poet and Raphael Delaunay, which brings me to reason number 5. PHÉDRE'S arc is Pygmalion or Cinderella-esque. You know, Pygmalion like My Fair Lady. All right, so there's a glow up that happens. It's a Bildungsroman, a coming of age tale. So you get to accompany Phèdre along her transition from young outcast to a courtesan and later hero. And so if you like those kinds of tales, this might be a fun read for you. You get pieces of her education, you're with her when she builds strong friendships, and did I mention balls? No, like fancy balls, like gorgeous events with formal attire. Okay. Jacqueline Carey beautifully paints her scenes. I love the Midwinter Masquerade. And as it goes with Phèdre's curse in experiencing pleasure and pain as one, number 4, this book can be pretty brutal. Jacqueline Carey does not go gentle on her characters or her readers for that matter. And there is loss and torment, and I'll leave that there. There's plenty of that to experience in here. Okay, number 3, and this is one of my favorites. There are knife-wielding monks. The Castilian Brotherhood was so well done. They are comprised of middle-born sons who are taken from their families at the age of 10 for rigorous training. They take an oath of celibacy and serve Cassiel. There are no temples to Cassiel, so they pray to Elua. Remember, Cassiel is the true companion to Elua. They protect whomever they're sworn to with their knives alone and only draw their sword if they intend to kill. Their fighting skills are insanely impressive, and I'm not usually into reading tons of action scenes, but their action scenes are so fun to read. And reason number 2, the world is richly imagined. I've already said a lot about this between the religion and lore and the Night Court and Castilian Brotherhood. There is some hinting at magic, light for fantasy, and no real overt uses beyond the Cingano Seers and the Master of Straits. And I love, love, love the Master of Straits. Such a cool concept. And I don't want to give anything away on that, but you don't get to learn more about him until like the last quarter of the book. My favorite parts of the book did occur in the latter half. The portion with the northern tribes, the Scaldi, flew by for me, in addition to the later adventure with the blue-tattooed, lime-haired Corinthne. And the number 1 reason to read KUSHIEL'S DART. It is a truly epic story that was enjoyable, satisfying, and hung together well. And it tied up fairly neatly. As I mentioned in the opening, this was, where did it go? Sorry. This was a deceptively long book, and it almost feels like 3 stories in one. The arch is so sprawling, but if you like fantasy books, chock full of scheming, passion, and adventure, give KUSHIEL'S DART a read. And I'm not one to say that many books should be converted to film, though I do think KUSHIEL'S Legacy would work well as a TV series, and there's a ton of material there, and it's certainly in HBO's wheelhouse. That said, it has been optioned a few times, but hasn't been greenlit, I think mostly because of the BDSM. I've included a link to Jacqueline Carey's blog post on this below if you want to read more. And also, you'll see there this hype poster, and as a millennial, I both love and hate this hype poster. And I know all the actors are too old for these roles now, but I'm going to entertain this for a second for funsies. I do like both Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Adrian Grenier, but they are totally miscast here. I loved Jonathan Rhys-Meyers in Match Point with ScarJo, as you can see also here. Is he really supposed to be Jocelyn, the Castleine brother? One of those knife-wielding monks? I really don't see it. I could see him as her peer Alcuin. He'd have to be younger, though. Also, I'm assuming Adrian Grenier is supposed to be Hyacinth. I don't see that either. Perhaps he could be Prince Baudouin. I envisioned Hyacinth as black. I mean, Jacqueline Carey describes Hyacinth as having dark skin. So, okay, I know it's fan art. I'll stop picking. Back to Kushiel's Dart for another minute. I will say that the battle, or probably battles, near the end of the book that extended nearly 100 pages did feel long and far away. A good fraction of it was bird's eye view battle descriptors, not really my thing. So this part may have felt longer than it really was, but once past it, things got better, and in the end, there were 2 loose threads left. And after reading the Amazon descriptions of the next 2 books, it seems, and I might be wrong about this, that book 2, Kushiel's Chosen, follows one thread, and book 3, Kushiel's Avatar, follows the other. Admittedly, I'm more interested in book 3's thread than book 2's. But my question for you readers is it worth it to continue? There are also a couple of spin-off trilogies and a new standalone book, Cassiel's Servant. So after getting used to Carey's complex world, there are like thousands of pages of adventure left ahead. So that alone might be a reason you want to pick up this series if you just really, really want to throw yourself into a fantastical world. And I won't be returning to Kushiel's for a little bit. If I do, I'm going to do a little mini TBR for you here. So next up on my TBR are Jane Eyre and the Eyre Affair. So I've already started and gotten back into Jane Eyre, and while it looks so much longer, like look at this. Look how much longer Jane Eyre looks than Kushiel's Dart. And I'll just tell you, Jane Eyre is half the length of Kushiel's Dart. It feels like such an easy, breezy read after Kushiel's Dart. I'm flying through it. But I'm reading Jane Eyre because I want to have a little refresher. I've read Jane Eyre before. Before I get into the Eyre Affair, which I've wanted to read for a long time, and my friend Brittany sent me this copy with a really nice note inside for my last birthday, and that was a year ago because today is my birthday again. So I think it's apt to make it onto my TBR at this point. And so from there, I'm going to do a bit of a palate cleanser, and I'm going to read a couple of children's books. So I'm going to read Impossible Creatures and Howl's Moving Castle. And the reason I'm doing this is because sometimes you need something really light. And selfishly, to benefit my own writing, I'm on a mission to dissect just what makes these books so magical. And then I'm going to take a trip back to sci-fi. And just so like you're not thinking it takes me absolutely forever to read a book because it's been a while between my Empire of the Vampire, Empire of the Damned, and Kushiel's Dart review, I did read Christopher Rocchio's Empire of Silence in between there, okay, which is also chonky, but it was so good. I'm just not going to do a review because we already have so many Sun Eater videos on our channel. And so I will be moving back to sci-fi again, and I'm going to be reading Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. So excited to dive in. That's what's on the docket. And so if you want to follow me on my reading journey, please subscribe to iWizard. I will update Goodreads at some point soon. Jordan's in control of our social media, so Facebook, Instagram. I have no idea what's going on over there, so that's his stuff. And oh yes, we have a Patreon. So if you want to give us a tip, it would be so much appreciated. Look iWizard up on Patreon. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.